Time to try to hitch a ride because you're trying to get to the card pool. I'm your host, Stu.
I'm Kyle.
And today we're looking at part 2 of our hidden gems of Worldwake.
This is, of course, part 2 of our multi-part set review of Worldwake. You can check out our previous part 1 in which we talked about the first part of our hidden gems and a little blip just above Stu's head up there. And today, of course, is tackling the second part of those hidden gems, starting at number 5. So, without further ado, let's kick this off, Stu.
Yep, and I'm going to start off with mine. And at number 5, like you so elegantly said there, Kyle, I'm going to be talking a card called Selective Memory. Now, this is a sorcery that costs 4 mana, 3 generic and a blue. And it reads, search your library for any number of non-land cards and exile them. Then shuffle your library. So this is a very unusual kind of card. It's a reverse tutor. Instead of getting a card that you want to your hand, you're removing all dead cards, all dead weight. You're trimming the fat from your deck to optimize your draws. Now, again, this is non-land cards, so it has to be a creature, a permanent, instant, sorceries, whatever. Just don't touch the lands.
I don't know, man. I have a copy of this card too. I've tried so hard for so long to see how this benefits you in any way. I just don't see it. I really don't. I'm sorry.
Well, it's because you have your glasses on. If you take them off, you'll definitely see it.
Well, this is like one with nothing. You know, you pay 1 mana and
not
discard
one
your
with
hand.
nothing.
It's that level of terrible.
That is not one with nothing. The polar opposite. Whoa, Kyle. All right, first of all, if you don't know what one with nothing is, look it up. And tell Kyle he's completely wrong in the comments, because I know he's completely wrong. No, with this,
don't get it.
All right, so you play Storm decks, right?
Right.
They're always raging. There's thunder. There's lightning. There's all these flashy gimmicks and gadgets. Well, if you're falling behind on an opponent, right, you need to make sure you're getting the cards that absolutely matter. Now, I've seen them with green, I've seen them with just red, just blue, blue-red. There's a variety of different things. If you're trying to go for a Storm deck that is an abnormal kind of color, this is something that could effectively optimize the cards that you need to make it so that your deck gets a lot thinner. You want to use an Epic Experiment deck, you want to make sure that you can get to that quicker and you can get the stuff that matters and you can get everything else there. If you're getting to like turn 7 or 8 and you still aren't going off with Storm, you need to make sure you're removing all the junk that you need. And this is a card that can effectively do that.
Or, on the other hand, you could just play a bunch of tutors like everyone else, and that's 100% better.
This is another option to tutors. Tutors are very expensive cards. So instead of having to go one route, if you can't take the high road, take the low road. And I mean, you'll get to the end at some point, sure. But exactly, this is what this purpose is to make it so that you can go ahead and clean out stuff. Also, it can be a win con. Look at a card like Laboratory Maniac. If you remove every single thing except for the lands, and you've already removed how many lands from your deck, that can be very effective for that. You can thin your deck out very, very well.
I feel like there's a lot easier ways to go about winning the game with a Lab Maniac, though.
I agree, but I'm saying this is a card that can meet a lot of different criteria. Again, effectively removing cards that are dead. How much does it stink being in a long-term game where it's going against each other, bam, 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 you're trying to, and you draw a ramp spell, or you draw something that's like a little bit of a booster. It's just very low impact.
Oh, I understand that logic, but I find the percentage of times that happens to me are extremely few and far between. So I don't really ever end up seeing that whole, oh, you need to thin the deck thing as an actual issue.
Well, I agree with it. It does seem risky, but it does have its plays. I mean, look at Torrent Elemental, for example. That's a card that loves being exiled. You can do small plays, little sneaky things. I agree it's not the most effective thing for you to do, but it's just an abnormal card, and you don't see this in Magic.
I mean, if it was exiling as many lands as you wanted from the deck, that I get, because you don't want to draw lands later in the game.
We have talked about a card like that before in one of our prior segments as
right,
well.
It's Trench Gorger. Yeah,
exactly.
I get that. This, I don't really get.
But if you put those two together...
Well, you get rid of your entire deck. Sure.
And Laboratory Maniac.
Yeah,
and a variety of other different things.
There's way easier ways to go about this.
It's just another option out there that's like Trench Gorger that Blue has at its reach.
I don't know, man. It's going to take a while more than that to sell me on this at any point.
All right, well, it
I'm
doesn't
not a
matter.
huge
As long as
fan.
everyone knows you were wrong about the other cards that you mentioned to reference this, it's all that really matters in my book at this point. But all right, anyway, we're going to go on to your number 5.
All right, well, mine, I believe this is a lot more understandable as a card, personally. It's called Chain Reaction, and it is a red sorcery, also costs 4, 2 colorless, and double red. Chain Reaction deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. Now, colors like white and black are really, really good in the board wipe department. Even blue has a lot of mass bounce spells, which are pretty solid. Red doesn't really have a ton of these things that are good. Like, we have things like Pyroclasm and things like Anger of the Gods and Slagstorm that deal
Blasphemous Act.
a fair amount of damage. Blasphemous Act is like the one key exception that's like a genuinely good red board wipe.
Okay.
We need more of those kind of cards. And this isn't that good, but it almost fits the bill. This is about the closest as red will come to having some kind of standard Day of Judgment type card. It's like, you may look at this and think, well, it probably won't be that impactful, but especially in a multiplayer game of Commander, how many creatures are going to be out there when you play this card? Probably a lot. So odds are you're going to pay 4 mana and everything is going to die.
I agree with you with that, and you're definitely right. This is Red's Wrath of God for the most part. The only thing that I don't like about this card is that it's a sorcery. I would want it to be an instant because if the board all of a sudden grows out of control, you have an answer for it right then and there. Now, I get Red doesn't always have that at its excess, but it's the only thing I feel like this card truly needs to make it so it can go. Otherwise, you're going to populate the board to do enough damage to kill everything else if it's not high enough.
But there aren't that many instant speed board wipes. There's a small handful, and the reason there aren't that many is because that would be so powerful if they weren't.
I agree. So, I mean, you have stuff like Route, but again, you're paying extra mana to get the instant speed.
Right.
So, I mean, you could do Vidalcan Orrery and get this thing out.
Yeah.
And, or, again, Izzet has access to making stuff very fast. That's the only thing I have to put at it. It's just, it's dependent on the field. If the field's big, it's good. If the field's small and they have a big creature, it's bad.
Also, if things have protection from red, damage doesn't work on them. So anything that's immune to affect damage like this is you're gonna have a bad time with that. But I find this comes up barely ever, if at all.
And there's also Red has damage doublers, so it can go ahead and do something like that, or make it even scarier with cards like Repercussion, which can damage the opponent as well.
You could like lose the game if you did that with this card. Yeah.
So it definitely has its highs and lows. It's 100%, I'd say, a Red staple. So I'm not disputing this card like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where I would put it, and that's exactly why I brought it up.
Cool.
It really is.
Well, moving on to my card, I'm going to be sticking with blue in this case at my number 4, and I'm going to go for another oddity. So Kyle, bear with me.
Okay.
It is an enchantment called Quest for Ula's Temple. God, I hope I said that right. It costs 1 blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may reveal it and put a quest counter on this card. At the beginning of each end step, if there are 3 or more quest counters on this, you may put a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is something that's very unusual in blue because it cares about creatures where typically that's never something that blue cares about. But it's also a type of creature that blue has access to, but are very green in their interactions because they cost a whopping amount of mana.
They are, yeah. Blue generally has a lot of curve-topping threats, but they're usually not nearly as just like generically powerful as something like green would have. So this is actually a really interesting card, Stu, and I've always wanted to kind of use this in some way, shape, or form, but I've just never really found a way to do it because it requires keeping your hand stocked with a very specific type of creature. Well, a couple different types, but still.
Well, and that's the thing that also makes it a selling point for me. It's not just octopus or just krakens, because there's not enough support for just any one.
No.
This is multiple subgroups.
You see a lot of that, though, actually. This whole theme of, like, sea monster tribal type thing is sort of a thing that comes up now and again. but there's not enough good ones out there to make it worthwhile. And also, they're so expensive that you really want to be stuck with a handful of them. I don't think
Well,
so.
it's expensive on the mana. They're usually fairly cheap cards, and they
Oh,
have
yeah.
monumental effects. Like Kendrick Leviathan, not Kendrick Lamar. That's a creature that I usually see in Magic just for how strong it is.
Oh,
just
yeah.
stand alone.
Like Scourge of Fleets, Stormtide Leviathan, Lorthos. There's a bunch of
All
ones
of
that are
them.
actually really good.
You'll see them here and there, but they just haven't gotten the tribe down to a point. If they do, this is a key card for this.
Oh yeah, like I've always felt that they need to print more support for these cards, like something to make them cheaper or easier to cast, something like that. I will say though, for Quest for Ruleless Temple, it's pretty easy to turn this card on because you're in blue. You have access to all kinds of effects, like your Divining Tops, your Scroll Racks, your Surveils, your Scries,
or just regular
your
draw
everything.
Cards. Yeah.
So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities to put quest counters on this card. It's really not hard.
Yeah, you can make it so that you can change the top deck at the beginning of your turn. So yeah.
I could see building a casual deck around this. Commander, not just yet, but maybe at some point we'll get there.
Hopefully.
I'd like that anyway. Yeah.
But anyway, enough about my card. Kyle, number 4, what is it?
All right, well, speaking of counters, this is exactly what this card does best. So, number 4 for me is Everflowing Chalice.
Classic card.
Yeah, this is a 0-drop artifact. Of course, it has multi-kicker, which we've discussed before, and it's multi-kicker in factors of 2. So, Everflowing Chalice enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. And then you can tap it to give yourself 1 colorless mana for each charge counter it has. So pretty much you have to think of this card in multiples of 2. You pay 2 mana, it's going to tap for 1. If you pay 4 mana, it's going to tap for 2, etc., etc. So the 2 mana for tapping for 1, that kind of meets the, Mind Stone level of Mana Rock, which is pretty decent.
Or an ingot or something like that.
Yeah, it's a little better than that even. But then for 4, you could tap for 2 mana, and it meets like the Hedron Archive sort of stand. So this is
scales.
Pretty good. It's like
Dreamstone
pretty
Hedron.
solid, and especially it works great with proliferating cards, which is part of why I love it so much. But also, the fact that it can just be played as a 0-drop artifact, I mean, you won't get anything out of it, but just the fact that you can. There are cards out there like Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, or Joyra, Weatherlight Captain, that love the idea of playing artifacts for free. And you can do that with this card if you want, just like Astral Cornucopia from the Theros block. It's good. I just love that kind of thing.
This is a better Astral Cornucopia.
It is. It definitely is.
And this works, like you said, in so many different things. It can work in Affinity. It can work with something like Trinket Mage, which is also great.
Yeah,
being able to get even more ramp. It's a great card. I would say it's not a hidden gem, but a gem on its own. You see this across the board.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised this card doesn't cost, price-wise, more than it does.
It's been
because
reprinted
a lot of people
so
use
many.
it. And yeah, like I was saying, scales great for the course of the game. Might be overcosted slightly in its abilities, but that's just for the utility, because any deck can use it. It's very fair.
It's totally fair.
Eminently fair card.
And it works with Atraxa. It works with cards like Doubling Season. So it's very, very powerful for its abusability. And yeah, great card. It's just another one of those mana boosting rocks. You just choose which one's best for your deck.
Absolutely.
Now, moving on to number 3, I have a card, very simple in what it does, and I'm sure we'll have some strong comparisons to other staples as well. My number 3 is going to a card called Nature's Claim. It costs 1 for a green instant that costs 1 green mana, and it reads, destroy target artifact or enchantment, its controller gains 4 life. Now, we see this effect across green in a variety of cards, whether it's creatures, instants, sorceries, you name it. Even planeswalkers. So what makes this one shine is that it costs 1 mana. All the other ones are usually at least 3 mana, if not going up
2
higher.
Or 3, because generally things nowadays have other abilities tacked onto them. So you generally see this at 3 mana. Yeah, you don't really see people playing just good old Naturalize for 2 anymore.
Yeah, Frozen Grip, for example, is more or less the one that you typically see.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, Fracturing Gust or something like that, something a little bit more bigger impact. But you do need to have the ones that are good for their singular use. And the reason why I like this one is because it gives them life. We see this in comparison with Swords of Plowshares versus Path to Exile.
This is pretty much Green's Sword of Plowshares is how I look at it.
Yeah, giving them 4 life, pretty low impact.
Oh yeah, definitely. And You were saying, Stu, I tend to like the bigger and splashier things, and this doesn't necessarily really do it for me. I like them to at least maybe have a creature's body to go along with this effect, so if I don't have anything to destroy, at least I can get something out of it.
But the thing that's really good about this, it's turn 1, right? The biggest turn 1 that Commander players hate seeing is Soul Ring. You now have an out to Soul Ring. Yes, it doesn't feel that good being able to waste a spot removal on something that gives a mana, but every time a player gets Soul Ring, they get turns ahead of players and that engine starts to turn. Having an out to it like you would have for a Sarah's Ascendant, being able to have 1 mana available to take that problem out of commission right then and there is really, really strong, and it moves you that much further. Same thing that we see with Swan Song, a 1-drop counterspell.
Yeah.
It has its plays. It's a very strong card, and it's been going up in price because people are now taking effect of this. This is the same criteria.
Yeah, and this is actually very much used as a sideboard card in Modern. A lot of decks pack this because, as you said, it's a very cheap answer to a lot of problematic threats and decks out there, and giving 4 life is pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things for a quick, instant 1-mana answer.
Yeah.
It's pretty good, I'll give you that. I don't think I would play with it in Commander, but hey, it's a cool card
It's
for
good
sure.
to know it out there. And green, being in green, usually has at least 1 to 2 mana left open on the side that it's not even coming close to using. So it's worth to know. But take your notes as we go on to our next card. Kyle, your number 3?
Yeah, and I'm going back and forth between artifacts and cards that like artifacts. This is another one of those. Number 3 on my list is Thada Adel, Acquisitor. My other Commander shout out from this list. I just had to mention this one. She's a 3-drop legendary Merfolk rogue, 2/2 for 1 colorless and 2 blue. Also, she has Island Walk, because this was back when Land Walk was a thing, making her unblockable if the defending player controls islands. Whenever Thada Adel deals combat damage to a player, you search that player's deck for an artifact card and exile it. And then until the end of the turn, you can cast that card. Then that player also then shuffles their deck. I should also add that if it's an artifact land, since it does say play, you still can technically play artifact lands. So I should include that in there. But Thada Adel, I love this card so much.
It's a good one.
It's just so great. You've got built-in, almost unstoppable, unblockable ability if the other player controls an island. And actually, blue has a fair bit of tricks to change basic land types.
Well, not only that, to make it
easy.
unblockable, you have, Thassa, you have Whisper Silk Cloak, which is an artifact to make it work.
Right,
and
you can
so
easily
much
get
more.
around that. And rogues and merfolk are both very well-supported types.
Definitely.
She makes, I mean, if you want to just make a fun little merfolk tribal deck around her, I'm sure you could do that. But where she really shines is stealing other people's degenerate artifacts out of their decks, of which there are plenty. Pretty much every Commander deck has at least one really stupidly powerful artifact.
Yes.
And almost everyone packs Soul Rings and Lightning Greaves and those generically strong artifacts that you would love to take with this card.
Oh, totally.
It's just fantastic. I mean, I think Thada Adel may need a lot of mana to really get going with any sort of good speed in a comparison to a lot of other Commander decks, but you can do aggro with this, you can do combo, you can do a Voltron strategy. There's so many things that you can do with this.
And, well, the good thing is that you're saying is that artifacts are the most relevant type beyond creatures and lands in Magic for the most part. So, even if it's early enough, you get this card out, you can just take something out that you know is going to be a problem and exile it. It's a free removal spell inherently. If they have Blightsteel, and that's just terrifying, take it out at turn 4. Or if they have something that you just need, like you're saying, if you... any kind of Sword of Feast and Famine, Sword of Fire and Ice, taking that from an opponent and getting that on a creature that's unblockable is just so strong.
Yeah, and of course, if you're playing any kind of Merfolk deck with any other legendary Merfolk, you pretty much have to put this in. It's a staple, and you can do so many cool things with it. Why wouldn't you?
The only thing I'll say is it's the same kind of problem you have with clone decks. It's just, it's as strong as what the opponent lets it be. If they aren't running very many artifacts and they're very anti-artifact, they're more enchantment-based, you're not going to be getting much. So being able to swing with the commander, the only thing you're really hoping for is commander damage at that point. But in the grand scheme of things, with a 4-player match, that won't be totally relevant.
And like I said, pretty much every commander deck has at least a Soul Ring.
At least a
which,
Soul Ring.
That's fine.
Yeah,
you know, if
boosting
that's
2
all
mana,
you take, hey,
which helps you
good.
cast more of their stuff down the line. And we've mentioned this card countless times in all the stuff because this is just a solid card to reference to anything.
Oh yeah, and it can lead to some really, really powerful commander decks.
Totally.
For sure.
But moving away from a lovely card, I'm going to go to one that you might dispute with me again, Kyle. Going to my number 2, I'm talking about a land called, Kyle, what's that first word?
Colony?
Colony Garden?
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm hoping. All right. Well, if I butchered that, anyone out there who's an English major, please correct me phonetically in the comments. This is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. And lastly, you just tap this, it produces green mana. So this is a land that doesn't truly pass the vanilla test, but it's something that's goofy in the sense that you see with Dryad Arbor. It's a land that generates you an army. And I would say this is almost a little better than Dryad Arbor, except that it doesn't have the creature subtext, because with Dryad Arbor, you aren't able to get mana out of it the turn it comes into play. But you also don't want to block with it because it hurts your net mana gain. This inherently separates Dryad Arbor from the actual land that it is tied with. So you have a blocker out there, which even though it has no power, it is a plant type, which is relevant. It can go with Anthems. It goes with Avenger of Zendikar, which we will talk about later in this. But it is, again, something that you don't see for green, because green takes time to build up. It's fine with giving you lands. But giving you a blocker for free is huge.
Well, Zendikar, the whole block sort of started giving us these spell lands where basically they come into play tapped and they act like basics, except they repay you by giving you some sort of spell-like effect. And I'll say it, like, I don't think this is the greatest one out of all of them, but it's still pretty good. Like, I'm not gonna get in your case about this one, Stu. I like this card. I don't really have too often that I really want to play this card, but hey, I would do it. If you're playing any kind of deck that revolves around tokens, or if you need some kind of sacrifice fodder, like even my Mazarek deck, I think I play this in it because it's just one more token for you to buff and or sacrifice. Yeah, this land is really good. The free mana is great on a land, you know. Free token is also really cool. Paying 0 for a 0/1 seems just about right. Well, honestly, I can't complain about that.
It also makes it so it's a little less of a dead draw in the late game too. Like if you get a tri-land or a bounce land late game, it doesn't feel as good because you're not getting much out of it. Sure, getting more mana, but inherently being able to put a body onto the field, a non-counterable body, unless it's, I believe, disallowed is the only way. Or stifled, yeah.
Basically.
So, but those are very rare to have, and waste it on a land is kind of, I mean, I'd rather them waste it on a land than waste it on something else.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think this is the greatest option out of all of these, but
hey, I know which one you're going to compare
if you can fit it in the deck, I mean, why wouldn't you play it? It's just a free creature. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if you're mono green, you usually have access to searching for any land. This just gives you more options.
Yeah, so I would totally include this one if you're playing a deck, you know, that's green. Can in any way support an extra token? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, all the time. So moving away from my land, it looks like into another land. All right, Kyle, tell me what's better than this land.
Indeed. Well, there's actually 2 on my list. This is the first one. Number 2, a pet card of mine. I love this so much. Halimar Depths. Now, this is pretty much the same format as our last one. It comes into play taps for a single color of mana. In this case, it's blue. But when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and then put them back in any order. So, it's basically this land here like a free Sensei's Divining Top activation, which once may not be all that impactful, but really, I like this card a lot, mostly in the early game, because, like it says, you can see your next 3 draws, and you can kind of set them up so that, you know, maybe if you're not going to get a land soon enough, you can shift that to the top of your deck, shift something that's higher cost down to the bottom. You kind of set yourself up really nicely for that, and it's not as fantastic in the late game, but it can be. You know, if you're really digging for an answer, a free one, possibly off this land, is a pretty good deal, really.
Yeah.
It's everything blue wants to do on a land. How great is that?
This is definitely the blue iteration of it. It does what blue wants. It does what blue likes. And for the new commander that came out where top deck matters, this works. It works for a commander like Mormir Vig, where top deck matters. If it's a creature, you can go ahead put it into your hand if you cast it another creature, or depending on how you actually truly want to use the effect. So it works, it speeds it up, gives you more answers, and it doesn't take a spell slot. So works. I totally agree. I like the green one more, but again, that's where you and I differ. I'm more green, you're more blue.
Oh, yeah, and like I said, I think this is the second best spell land in the set. I'll get to the first one because that's my number one, but we'll get there in a minute. What have you got for your number one?
Well, I'm going to move to my number one. I'm going to move away from the land train. I'm going to go talking about a creature card called Bloodhusk Ritualist. It costs 3 mana, 2 generic, and a black for a vampire shaman. It has a 2/2 body with multi-kicker of just a single black. In addition, when Bloodhusk Ritualist enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card discards a card for each time it was kicked. Sorry about that. So the reason I like this card, and the reason why this card is very strong, and I know it's an uncommon for my top pick. I know you always are very wary when it's not a rare or a mythic.
Well, I'm just kind of confused about this one, so you'll have to explain it to me.
So you go ahead, you pay the 3 mana for the body, right?
Sure.
So for each black mana, now typically with kicker we see it as 2. This one's 1, so it's undercosted for the multi-kicker side, but higher costed for the body, typically in this case. So each time you go ahead and you do it, a player goes ahead and discards a card for each time it's kicked. So this is a very strong version of discard, because typically in Magic when we see discard, it's a sorcery or an instant or some sort of like you lose a creature or something like this. More bells and whistles to make it to work. But this is good on its own as a standalone. If you have enough mana, and black has the ability to use rituals or be able to make mana with Cabal Coffers in a variety of ways, you can go ahead and effectively neuter a player's hand. But the thing that makes it stronger is it's a creature. It can be recurred from the grave, it works with all sorts of strategies, and it's also a vampire. So you can go ahead, bring it back to your hand, recast it. You can effectively, if you have an infinite mana, make every player lose every card in their hand.
Well, that is true, but in a lot of cases, I would almost rather have one of those creatures that, instead of making them discard a bunch of cards, allows you to strategically look at their hand and pick the one that you want to discard.
There's different styles to discard. Like you see with stuff like Gitaxian Probe, for example, being able just to see the card and draw a card might be better than to actually see a card and discard a card. There's many different varieties and many different decks. But if you're playing a discard deck, like Nath of the Guilt Leaf, for example, we use something like that, where each time a card is discarded, you get a creature token for it. So being able to do that in bulk is very strong.
Yeah, and also multi-kicker, like you said, low-costed, so you can get a lot of mileage out of this, probably later in the game, too. And it's got decent stats. It's easy to pay for, make big in that way. And also, I don't know, like, it's in a good tribe, I guess, too. Vampires can use a little bit of this, maybe.
The only reason I really like it is because it's in black. Since it's in black, the recursion on it, if you have something like a Phyrexian Reclamation, for very little mana, get it back to your hand and rinse and repeat this. Until this is exiled, they're not going to have a hand, and you're going to make sure of that. But for them to waste an exile spell on something that's not quintessential for like a combo, I think that's always something that is very high, because you're making them waste stuff they don't want to waste on things that they need to get rid of.
Yeah, I just don't love making people discard cards unless there's some overwhelmingly good reason for it, because it isn't the best way to attack someone a lot of the time. Against a board full of creatures, making them discard a couple cards is not really going to help you.
Well, I agree with that, but also think about how well this combos with stuff like Waste Not. Go ahead, you randomly make them get stuff, lose stuff, whatever. You can get mana, you can get creatures.
Well, that's what I meant by there are only certain circumstances where it becomes good.
But the more you're using just a soul discarding deck, the better that this becomes in that.
Yeah, and I mean, there is Nath of the Guilt Leaf. The Flip Liliana sort of uses discard a little bit. I haven't really been convinced by a commander that revolves around discard yet. I suppose there could be one in the future, but
actually,
nothing I've seen so far really makes me want to build that.
I agree, but I don't think you truly have the eye for discard. No offense to you, Kyle, for that. But
maybe not.
One thing I would like to maybe see from this one is if it was just target player. It would go so well in a zombie deck for just being able, you go ahead, you cast this, you pay a little bit, you dump 2 giant cards that you want in the grave that you would classically entomb. That's the one thing I think that would make this card stronger than what it is, but what it is very good for just how much it can scale with the game. Again, I'm not one for instants and sorceries to make it so somebody loses a card or two and you have to go through hoops or you have to deal combat damage to make them discard. I'd rather something that's an effect that I control right then and there to get the effects I want.
Well, I guess that's true, and actually that sort of feeds into my number 1 card here, sending things to the graveyard. You gotta make sure you're careful about that and can get rid of them too. So what is my number 1 for this set? But the one and only Bojuka Bog.
Of course it is.
Oh, it had to be. I mean, let's be honest here. It's the best card in the set. So it is though.
I don't know about the best card in the set, but it's definitely a great non-money card.
I mean, it's the best spell land in the set by far. Grave Hate is basically a priority in any format. Well, I call them spell lands because they have spell-like effects.
All right, that's fair, but it's just not a spell.
No, it's not, and that's part of why it's so good. Because as we said, free spells is a good thing. So when effects like this are stapled onto lands, that's amazing. In this case, it's black. And I'm just sad this isn't a swamp basic, but, you know, whatever. But anyway,
way too good.
When Bojuka Bog comes into play, you exile all cards from target player's graveyard. As I was saying, Grave Hate is a priority in pretty much any format of Magic, and it does this for free. If you've been playing Magic for any amount of time, you know that exiling somebody's graveyard en masse is an amazing ability, and you know, if you've been playing this game, that Bojuka Bog is a card you need to look out for and needs to be feared.
Especially if you're using a Reanimator strategy.
Yeah, because this will wreck you.
Well, and it's actually very goofy that this card is black, because black would hate having this played on it. I feel like almost the green and black ones should be swapped. Like, you go ahead, the black one comes into play, it gives you a zombie token. That would make sense. You got something out there that it's got lingering whatever in it.
Maybe.
Because green hates dealing with the graveyard. It has so many ways to deal with the graveyard. So the fact that it's not on that land, I feel like Wizards just kind of was being like, hey, we're going to give black some extra support that it doesn't need. But I will also mention that there has been a new card that can make it so that this effect is across all decks now. We have Scavenger Grounds, the desert land from, what was it? Amonkhet or Our Devastation.
One of those.
So legit, that's pretty much the same thing for a little bit more mana. You go ahead and you pretty much lose that land or another desert, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And then you make it so all graves are exiled, not just one target players. But this one can potentially miss. If you have hexproof as a player, the new Sigarda that came out that makes it so you and all humans are hexproof, you are now safe from that. So it makes it so you can get a little bit of a miss. But either way, this is one of the best lands that you could put in any deck that has black in it.
Yeah, and also something we haven't mentioned about any of these spell-like lands is that if you bounce lands back to your hand, you can reuse their abilities, and there are plenty of ways to do that.
Yes, tons of them. Or to even sack the land, get it back from the grave. There's a whole bunch of different plays, but sometimes just getting it once works out very well. It just feels bad if you are really hurting for mana and this card is in your hand. The same kind of thing that you would get from a Temple of the False Gods, playing it on like turn 3 just because you need the mana to stay up to par.
I've done it before. It feels really awful, but sometimes you just got to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, every now and then you might hit a Swords or something like that happened earlier, so you could get lucky, but this is a card that's almost better in the late game just as a standalone. Maybe mid, depending on where you're at in the game, but it's just, again, it's a deck killer. A land that kills a deck that isn't like $1,000 or a couple $100 to go buy.
And like I said, there are some cards that we'll look at, you know, in the money cards that are probably in the objective, you know, more powerful than this. But just for how widespread this card's use is, it's a common. And pretty much, you know, if you bring this up, this is one of those Magic cards, everybody knows what it is. So just for how popular and widespread it is, I personally think this is the best card from Worldwake, hands down, bar none, period.
That's not a money card.
That great.
I agree. I mean, I wanted to try to find a lot of cards I've just never seen, and it could work out in different iterations for this one. I saw Bojuka Bog, and I was like, I know you're going to pick it. That's why I'm not picking this one.
Hey,
We're going to at least talk about it, which is what I wanted to do. And again, if you didn't pick this one in yours, I would have changed one of mine to make this my number one.
Hey,
it's a great card.
I am nothing if not practical, and Bojuka Bog just pragmatically is the best choice. That's why it's my number one.
Yeah, if there's any deck that I see that doesn't have this and it runs black, I always have to point out to someone, have you considered using Bojuka Bog? And if not, have you at least considered Scavenging Grounds?
Definitely.
Or Scavenger Grounds, my bad. But I think that's going to wrap up our hidden gems for right now for Worldwake. Yeah. So be sure to let us know what you thought of the cards. Is there any that you feel like we missed that are outside of the money as well, that are OG to this set? Because there's a lot of cards I wanted to talk about, and
yeah, this set was really great.
There really was. I mean, honestly, we could maybe even do a second look at this set, maybe
probably,
in the future.
Yeah.
But if that's something you'd like us to see, you'd like to see us do, let us know in the comments below. You can reach out to us at many other sources.
Yeah, like our Reddit, Twitter, Facebook pages. You can find us on every one of them at the handle MTG the Card Pool, and also, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. What did you think of some of these hidden gems? You got any other suggestions for us? Have at us.
Let us know if Kyle is wrong about all of his criticisms on my cards, like he always is. But anyway, until then, I am Stu.
And I'm Kyle.
And we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.